Welcome, everyone, to the GSMC Chip Shot Football Podcast presented by the GSMC Sports Network. I'm your host, Manny Maradiege, coming to you today, April 8th, to start a new week with some more NFL topics and discussions to start off this week. I'm going to begin the show talking about Tyreek Hill and the sort of news that he ruffled up over the past weekend and into last week on Odell Beckham Jr. There's been a connection there between the Dolphins and Odell. Tyreek kind of made that a bit more anticipated, so I'll get more into that with what he posted on social media. Later on, I'm going to talk about some teams that would want to be trading up in the first round, kind of lurking around that number 16th overall pick that is currently held by the Seahawks. I'm going to get into those teams and what they could potentially offer for that pick. Then, later in the show, I'm going to be talking about the Seahawks, the Panthers, the Patriots, among teams to get started today on their offseason programs. Then, to end the show, a little bit more on Stefon Diggs and Josh Allen, dating back to week 1 of last year, and an incident that they had in the locker room where Josh Allen sort of snapped at Stefon Diggs, and how that all plays into the whole situation of Stefon Diggs eventually being traded to the Houston Texans just last week. All of that coming up on today's episode. Make sure to follow, like, and subscribe to the GSMC Chip Shot Football Podcast. And before I jump into the first segment, as always, if you have any questions or comments during today's show, please use the tip and donations link, gsmcsportsnetwork.net, with any of those. Using this link, make sure that I can see your question pop up right away in the chat box to my right. I can read your question on air, then continue the conversation like that, take it somewhere else with some of the questions. It's a lot more engaging. It's pretty fun for me on this end to see what you guys are saying, and it's a big help for the show anytime you guys are able to do that. So again, if you have any questions, use the tip and donations link, gsmcsportsnetwork.net. But in saying that, I could start off with that first segment like I mentioned. Back in March, around the NFL league meetings where all the coaches were there, some general managers, and everyone got a chance to speak to them in depth, Mike McDaniel said that the Dolphins had made an offer to Odell Beckham Jr., but he said that the talks were going to be ongoing. Nothing was really solidified. The biggest thing he said was that they made an offer to him. It was on the table. The ball is now in Odell's court. In saying that, reports came out after that, one being from ESPN's Jeremy Fowler, also saying that Miami is pushing pretty hard to sign Odell Beckham Jr., but again, still no deal. At this point, last season, Odell had already signed with the Baltimore Ravens, so it was a bit more cut and dry and clear to OBJ last year. This year, not so much. I assumed he wanted to go back to Baltimore on just how they all finished out, how good of a team they had, and with that feeling of just wanting more. They felt they probably deserved more with how the offense really played in that second half. I'm sure that left a bad taste in his mouth. But for right now, the Ravens don't seem really inclined to try and re-sign Odell. They released him, but up till now, there hasn't been any news about him receiving a contract from the Ravens or them really pursuing him at this point to come back to Baltimore, so that's something else to watch out for. And with all of the news swirling around Odell Beckham Jr. and the Dolphins, Tyreek Hill actually went on his Snapchat last week, and this is where it all kind of got ruffled up and everyone started to get excited about this. Tyreek Hill went on his Snapchat and posted a picture of himself with Odell Beckham Jr., just, dapping up, saying what's up to each other before a game, and he captioned it, "OBJ to Miami confirmed." That made everybody start hitting up Odell, reaching out to him, asking him if this was true. Nobody had posted anything at this point with Ian Rappaport, Adam Schefter, whoever it is you follow or get your news from. Nobody had posted anything. People started thinking, like most probably would, that Tyreek Hill was just confirming the news. How else would you get the news other than from a player coming from the direct source? People certainly believed it. I had my doubts, in honesty, just seeing it. I thought there was no way that this news breaks like this. And Tyreek Hill posted it. Everyone, like I mentioned, reached out to Odell, asking him what he thought about this, probably congratulating him. I'm sure he got some of them for people actually believing this was true. But Odell kind of calmed everyone down. Afterwards, he responded on X to Tyreek Hill and just feedback he was getting from everybody on this. And he said, LOL, I'm confused. Today, did I sign somewhere? Everybody keep hitting me up. But again, it was funny how he responded to that. But there was no official word from Miami or any insiders on the news on Odell. It's still an ongoing thing. I'm sure other teams are interested, at least in OBJ. I'm sure some have reached out to him with a proposal. Certainly there are some that need wide receivers that it wouldn't be such a bad idea to entertain Odell Beckham Jr. on your team. You think of the Chargers, maybe the Chiefs if they want a cheaper option for themselves. The Rams back to LA for Odell wouldn't be such a bad idea in my opinion. You look at potentially the Bengals. If Tyler Boyd doesn't come back, signing Odell wouldn't be so bad either. There's definitely a lot of teams that earlier in last week, there was reports, like I mentioned, some of those teams, as well as the Lions being interested on top of that. I said the Chargers, but all these teams still needing wide receivers. I'm not questioning why it's taken a while. There's certainly some questions with Odell in terms of production that he could still produce as a number 3, potentially a number 2 receiver. Last year, he played 14 games, which is very encouraging. Just looking at his track history with injury, he tore his ACL recently in 2022 in that Super Bowl, coming off of that Super Bowl, missing a lot, or really missing the whole season in 2022. So that is a pause to really think about signing Odell. But other than that, like I mentioned, 14 games is encouraging. 565 receiving yards, 3 touchdowns in an offense that is already known for not really producing high numbers, high stat caliber receivers with the Ravens. It's not a bad thing. They have Lamar and now they have Derrick Henry. You kind of expect none of those receivers to get really a lot of looks in that offense. And last year, they didn't have Derrick Henry, but they had Gus Edwards and a bunch of other running backs in that backfield to share the carries. Now, looking at it this year, it might be a bit more receiver friendly just because they have only really Derrick Henry. So you need to spot him at some point so other receivers could see more targets. But you also have Mark Andrews taking up some targets. Isaiah Likely had a nice breakthrough end of the year last year, so he's going to get some targets as well. Already that doesn't really show the kind of level that Odell is right now, as opposed to the Rams, where I thought he was shown a little bit better and in a bit more positive light because they throw it so much. Matthew Stafford is a great quarterback. He showed how, really in that Super Bowl, how he wasn't killing the Bengals. It was still a close game, but it always seemed like he was wide open. He was getting yards after the catch, and to me that was at the peak of Odell, at this new version of Odell that you were going to get later in his career. What kind of actions, what kind of play that you could get from him. That's where I thought the peak of it was. He signed with the Ravens, so I anticipated a decline. But even so, where Odell is right now, if healthy, I still think he could provide something very well for the Miami Dolphins. Another option that they were still looking at was Tyler Boyd and seeing what they could work out there. Tyler Boyd, probably the best remaining free agent that I can think of right now off the top of my head in all these teams that need a wide receiver. It makes sense with Miami, but he will come at a more expensive price for them, being younger and just requiring more, I'm sure, than Odell at this point. That is another option, but again, reports have shown that the Dolphins don't want to spend overly much on a receiver that's going to end up being their number 3 because they have Waddle and Tyreek Hill. For more, sticking with the Dolphins more, you look at that division, you want to try and keep pace a little bit with the Jets. They're just signing everybody, addressing everything in free agency, it seems. And if you're the Dolphins, you're probably up there with the Jets in terms of talent and competing for that AFC East at this point because of where the Patriots are right now, where the Bills are after the Stephon Diggs trade. You want to make sure you're still in it with them and matching them toe-to-toe with this talent and all the players that they have. Not to say that they're really far behind, but you want to make sure you don't fall behind after having the opportunity to sign OBJ. Maybe Tyler Boyd's out there. You have to do something because you lost Cedric Wilson. You lost Mike Gesicki in the offseason. Right now, you have Braxton Berrios. Not Braxton Berrios. Is it Braxton Berrios? I can't think of his name right now. If that's the receiver, I'm blanking on his name. But other than that, it's Hill, Jalen Waddle, and then that's really it from right there. Of course, they can draft people, but if you can get Tyler Boyd, Odell, which I think is still the best fit for them, I would go that route. And just still figuring out the business side of it is important. I know that. But right now, that's the biggest thing for the Dolphins, trying to figure that out. And other than that receiver on the offensive side of the ball, the only really need on the defensive side of the ball is maybe some linebacker help, some more pass rushers along the defensive line to fill the gap left by Christian Wilkins. And then after that, it's going to be hard for anybody to make a case for me that the Dolphins aren't at least as good as the Jets and the favorites maybe in contention with the Jets also for that AFC East. They have been projected to draft a Byron Murphy, the defensive tackle out of Texas, when they're picking, I think at 21, if I remember correctly. So that's an option, but you always want more depth at those positions. They don't have a lot of glaring needs right now, so addressing them, I think, sooner rather than later, when the prices are most likely going to go up, in some cases, I think would be smart for them. But we're going to have to just see where that plays out. The Dolphins, one of the top contenders, they want to push even more to make it past the first round. Signing Odell, addressing all the other issues is the way to go, in my opinion. But in the meantime, we're going to leave it at that. And after the break, in a few seconds, we're going to keep going on today's episode, talking about some of the teams that have been rumored to be lurking around that number 16th pick, trying to trade up to that, maybe a little bit behind or a little bit past that, to address some of their needs. I'm going to get into that, as well as Stephon Diggs and some other teams starting their offseason programs today as well. So stick around, more to come on today's episode of the GSMC Chip Shot Football Podcast.